So how did you get? We'll skip ahead a little bit because I want to bring it more into present day. Well, no, I'm not either. I'm curious. What was this event in Peru that what did it take place in the jungle of Peru? What was this thing that transformed the direction of your life?
Unfortunately, I've decided not to divulge that yet, and I'm not trying to be mysterious.
Okay.
I'm not trying to self-aggrandize. I'm just not sure, because it's such a personal thing, that it's beneficial, that it would be beneficial to other people. I don't know. I mean, but suffice it to say, it was a very personal, powerful encounter with God, uninduced by any kind of narcotic or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say this: I wanted to hear the voice of God. I wanted to have my burning bush experience.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have a burning bush experience.
That's a dangerous thing because God sometimes grants it, and it's
a dangerous thing. Yes,
yeah.
I wanted to. I was so hungry to encounter the tangible. And so that's what my purpose was, my main purpose. And that's why I spent so much time in the jungle. And a very fascinating story surrounding this whole thing. But believe me, it would take me 6 hours to unfold it. But let's just, as I said, suffice it to say, I did have the encounter with God that I was hoping for, but with a twist. So, but it propelled me forward into the reality of the world in which I live became exceedingly apparent. And I ended up getting married and going back to Peru with my wife and having 2 kids in Peru, two sons.
Mm-hmm.
And we were engaged in missionary type work for a while in Peru, but also I started a business there. And so it was a mix of the two for some time, for 10 years. Actually, I lived in Peru for 10 years. My wife was there for 7 years. 2 of my sons are Peruvian citizens, Peruvian American citizens. And it was during that period of time that I began to come across, because I liked being with the native people, I liked being with the old timers, the hunters, the old fishermen and so forth. And I would hear tales all the time, bizarre tales of cryptozoological things that lived in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And among these tales, many times, or at least a few times, were tribes of giants that still lived in the jungle. I was told this by several different people, but one particular story that stood out in my mind was an old hunter friend of mine who would walk for days into the jungle and go hunting by himself. And these guys are tough. I mean, they would just sleep with their gun against a tree. And if you've ever been in the Amazon, it's everything wants to eat you. Mm-hmm. It's the food chain, and you're not on the top when you're in there. And everything wants to eat you in the Amazon. And from the tiniest little things, to everything. You're just a piece of meat. But when he was out hunting on a particular trip by himself, he was way deep in the jungle, and he came across somehow, in some context, I don't really remember, giants. Very furtive giants that were moving around in the jungle, and he realized there's a tribe of very exceptionally tall beings out here. And I remember him telling me that story, and the whole Genesis 6 thing wasn't really on my narrative. It had always been sort of in the back of my mind. I had read the Book of Enoch and so forth, but it wasn't really in focus yet. And after I started hearing these stories, I started to get real curious. Wait a minute, are there other stories like this? Is anybody publishing? So I went to the internet, to Google, and guess who I found?
Steve Quayle.
And Steve's stuff was, I just consumed it while I was in Peru. I was reading articles and stuff and by Steve, and then, or I should say, the books, the Genesis 6 Giants book, and that's how it began for me. this particular realm of information in terms of giants and really starting to do the research. And you know how it is. One thing leads to another.
Right.
Giants lead into other things very quickly.
Right.
And things I had been familiar with. The Genesis 6 affair, I was familiar with that. Back from, in high school, I went and bought a pseudepigrapha in Borders. Remember Borders?
Yeah.
Went there and bought one of those.
Back when they sold books in stores?
Yeah, exactly. I bought one of those big, fat pseudepigrapha books and read the Book of Enoch and other books. And so I was very familiar with the whole idea of the Genesis 6 stuff, but never really laser focused on it until I came across Steve's work. And then, long story short, I ended up moving back to the States. Basically being forced to move back to the States. God, I hardly ever go willingly into anything. God has to open the door and then kick me through it, usually. So I'm busy usually banging on doors that are not open to me. And then the right one opens and I get kicked through it. So it's hardly ever a choice. It's hardly ever a situation in which Tim is making a wise choice. It's usually, all other options are just gone, and there's only one way to go. So that's usually the way it works for me. And so I ended up going back to the States and then living in Cleveland for a little while, opening up a communication with Steve. I speak Spanish. So Steve was actually in the process of wanting to get some things done in Spanish. One thing led to another. He realized that I was familiar with the content, and so I moved to Bozeman. And the rest is history.
No worries here. We're going to decline that call.
That's Steve calling you, I think.
Forgot to put the phone on Do Not Disturb while for the no worries.
But that's how I ended up working with Steve. It was just that. We were communicating, we were corresponding. I had asked him some questions and the Spanish thing, and then there's a lot more details. Like I told Josh this the other day in his program, I loaded up my truck with all my earthly goods. And I didn't, which wasn't much. I could literally put them all inside of a car and on top of a car. It was quite a comical situation. It was like the Grinch that stole Christmas, the sled when he loads it up with all the...
yeah.
That's what my car looked like. And I almost died on the way driving out to Bozeman. I crashed on a bridge in an ice storm and almost came a foot from being T-boned by a semi-truck.
Wow.
I was looking at death. Not for the first time in my life, but I was staring death in the face. And it missed me by a foot. It literally missed me by a foot. And so that was on my way to Bozeman with all my possessions. So I won't bore you with the details, but I ended up getting there. Went back, and a good friend of mine, gave me, had some flyer miles, not standby tickets, some flyer miles or something. I can't remember what the situation was, but I ended up flying with him and his wife to Bozeman. They sort of escorted us to Bozeman. It was rough getting there, but we got there.
Yeah.
And I've been working with Steve for about 4 years. Which is great. Steve Quayle's awesome.
It's funny because after listening to him for so many years on that radio program where he has a persona, I guess, or maybe it's just the content that he puts out there is oftentimes pretty dark. You can come away with the impression that he's kind of an angry guy who is. But when you get to know him behind the scenes, he's really funny.
Yes. You laugh a lot with Steve.
Yeah.
He's very lighthearted, which would surprise most people. We went to Peru. We did a trip to 2017. We went to Peru this year and to Cusco on an expedition and seminar we launched. And L.A. was there with us, and Steve was there. Me and Steve didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, we've got all these strangers who we're going to meet for the first time in a foreign country, in a third world country. And Steve had never been to Peru. And so I'm thinking, what have I done? On the way, what in the world was I thinking? But it ended up being amazing. It was just a wonderful time. And Steve had a great time, and I had a great time, and our wives. And Steve was very jovial, hilarious through the entire trip. And that is something that would surprise people, because Steve is very intense.
Yes.
And on the radio, but behind the scenes, he's still intense behind the scenes, but he's very lighthearted. And it has been an honor, a privilege, and an adventure working with Steve Quayle.
Yeah.
Steve's the real deal.
Yeah, and that's the thing that that I have come to learn. I mean, there was a point going back 15 years now where listening to the program and after hearing, night after night of Steve as a watchman calling out the warning for various things that were coming our way, government intrusion into our lives, the spiritual decadence of the country in which we live and things like that, just thinking, oh my, come on, is he just trying to sell survival gear or precious metals? No, he really is genuinely concerned about the direction our country is going, the failure of the church, which should be on the front lines and saying, hey, people, wake up. We're coming to the conclusion, we're coming up to the end of the age, the end of the eon, that was prophesied 2,000 years ago. And nobody, very few in the church, let me say nobody, but very few in the church, and especially not in the mainline denominations, are saying anything about it. So you're right. He is the real deal. He's a genuine person, and somebody, like I said, when you get him off the, away from a microphone or a camera, he's just hysterical.
Yeah. He and Tom, both he and Tom, carry an urgency in their spirit about a lot of things, about the future, about what's unfolding in the earth. Both of them, kind of in different ways. Tom really has pursued the transhumanist type stuff and has led the charge on that, and then Steve, a lot of the political stuff and the weather wars and all that kind of stuff. But they both carry an analogous urgency I've picked up on both of these great men. And what's interesting is that what most people don't realize is that both Steve and Tom have very similar things happen to them. In Steve's case, he had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus when he was a heathen. And in Tom's case, he died.
Yeah, right.
But both of them were told the exact same thing from Jesus, from the Lord Jesus Christ, which was, I'm going to show you. He showed them both a panorama of things that were going to happen, and then he told them both, you're not going to remember. You're not going to remember until the time comes. And then I'm going to basically put the urgency in their spirit and recall in their memory what they had seen. Both Steve Quayle and Tom Horn, both of these men had this experience, not together, separately in their own lives. Tom died, and Steve, when he was thoroughly converted, when he saw Jesus and fell dead at his feet, like dead, not fell dead, but fell as dead at his feet, as the Bible says. And most people don't realize that. I find that fascinating.
That is.
Because these two guys, more than anybody else, have really been on the forefront and the front lines of getting people prepared for what's coming. In two different, in the realms of their operation have been different. But they're both, and it's interesting now that we're all converging. And not only are they converging, you and I are converging, and
we're bringing
Gen
in other
people. You got
Josh Peck, and now we got Justin Fall and Wes Fall. The Fall brothers are joining in as part of this ministry. What Sharon has been doing, and the contributions that she's making from her background. I mean, there's a long time when she went back to school as an adult student, and had to borrow a lot of money in order to get that biology degree. We're probably going to be paying on that until she dies, until Jesus comes first.
That was an expensive title in front of her name there.
It was, but it was for his purposes, because right now she's putting it to work for the kingdom.
It gives her credibility that she otherwise would
not have. Right. So that is,
and we need people like that.
And it's all come together for those reasons. I mean, my background in a secular broadcasting career, promoting a lifestyle that
you were born with the voice.
Well, and the face too, for radio. But it's all part of a plan that is coming together. It's like that movie Signs, the Mel Gibson movie, where you realize at the end
of the movie everything starts to fall into place.
Exactly, and you realize that none of it was an accident. His brother's failed baseball career, the daughter's phobia, water phobia,
all the water glasses all over the house.
Right, it all fit together perfectly.